just wanted to do the February real estate update for Northern Colorado from my perspective. This video this time will have a couple of other things in it that I think are really helpful. I've found some other additional resources in terms of videos and things out there that I think are really helpful to help go through what's happening and an understanding what's happening both monetarily and then also in with water for us locally. I want to go through some statistics that the group has done. They're a great company here in town. They've been doing statistics for the last 42 years as a company. They do a deal every January that's called the forecast, and kind of tells you what's going on for the year. So I want to go through those numbers and give you some statistics on those. I think it really helps shed some light financially on why real estate is such a great use of money these days compared to keeping it in the bank, given the inflationary issues that are happening with our dollar. So first thing is first, here's the statistics update. I want to go through these. We're going to go through each one of them, starting with just an overall view of Northern Colorado and then each community from there. So here's Northern Colorado as an overview. You're going to see on the left-hand side the year, so starting in 2015 going to 2021. You're going to see the number of homes sold, the percent change in the number of homes sold, the volume, the percent of that change in volume, and then the median sales price. One of the things you're going to notice right away is that year over year we sell similar numbers, although it's for the last few years it's been 10,000, 10,000, 11,000. Had a pretty good jump over the last couple of years to 12 and 13,000. And then you'll also see that the volume has increased dramatically. So in 2015, we were in that $3 billion range. And by the end of 2021, we're looking at $6 billion, so almost nearly doubled that number. The other piece to notice here is the median sales price change. So moving from just under $300,000 all the way up to $450,000. That's a significant change. This last change that you'll see here is that you're looking at appreciation rates between 6 and 13%. I want to first take a look at Fort Collins and show you some significant things here. The first is, as I've talked to many of you about in the left-hand column, you're going to see that we sell about the same number of houses every year. So that 3,000 to 3,500 range is pretty typical for Fort Collins. The other piece that you're going to see is that volume is steadily increasing. The overall total volume is significantly increasing, almost doubling by the time you move from 2015 to 2021 in terms of the overall number. The other big piece to look at here is our median sales price. So in 2015, an average house, or median average house in Fort Collins was $310,000. By the time you move to 2021, that's $479,000. And you can look in the left-hand side, this incredible increase in the percentage of overall year-over-year appreciation on the house. The worst year we have in here is 2019 at 3%. But other years, we're looking at 16, 11, 14%. It's a pretty significant number that is growing the value of the housing. Next, we're taking a look at Loveland. And so again, just tremendous changing here that's going on between 2015 and 2021. Median sales price starts at $274. We move all the way up to $433. So it's a significant jump. That's a huge increase year over year. The volume actually is increasing quite a bit in Loveland as well. I've seen some new developments in Loveland. A lot of this has to do with the stuff around the lakes at Centerra. It's pretty significant. Again, on the right-hand side, you're going to see here that the percentage change is actually better in Loveland year over year. So again, moving from the lowest number being 4.3 all the way up to this 12 to 15% increase in appreciation. One of the more interesting communities is Greeley and Evans. This has always traditionally been a lower priced community around here. You're going to see a similar deal here between the number of homes that are sold. You'll see a decrease in inventory from 2015 to 2021. But the one thing that's really I want to point out is the median sales price. Median sales price in Greeley was $204 in 2015. That's moved all the way up to $360. So still some good value in Greeley, but that percentage, this is our best community in terms of overall percentage change. The lowest we see is 2019 at 5.4, 4.31 in 2020, and then we move all the way up more consistently towards that 14%. Finally, we'll be looking at Windsor and Severance. So quite a bit different number here in terms of the number of homes sold in Windsor and Severance. But again, one thing to point out here is the percent changing here. It has a lot to do with new construction. So you'll see a percentage of change in volume that's significant. And that has a lot to do with the fact that this is kind of the relief valve for new construction. There's no more room left at Fort Collins. We're moving across the other side of the interstate and into Windsor and Severance. Severance has been one of the fastest growing communities in all of Colorado over the last few years. So something to kind of pay attention to. The other thing you're going to notice here is the percent and change is a lot, very consistent. You have some that don't even really change, 0.035, 1.181, and that has a lot to do with the fact that there's a lot of new construction in this particular area. One thing to point out in 2021 is the 16.83% change has a lot to do with water. Great. One of the things we've talked about a lot as I've been talking to clients and different people over the years is the water situation in northern Colorado. 85% of our water comes from the other side of the mountains, and 85% of our population live on the Front Range. So we have some things that are ahead of us as challenges. I thought nothing's really changed necessarily in terms of some of the moratoriums that are out there with Northweld and some of the other stuff that are happening and just politically around us. But I did think this video was super helpful to kind of understand how this system actually works. And once you kind of understand this system, you'll understand why the cost is as expensive as it is, and some of the other things that are out there that cause troubles in terms of the service area that the CBT system tries to support. So I think this video is super helpful. So take a watch at this and I'll be right back.
People who once hungered for gold found the Rocky Mountains also held the key for what every prospector and farmer needs: water. Even then, settlers dreamt of plenty and looked beyond the Continental Divide to the surplus waters of the West Slope. Today, more than 80% of our water supply originates on the West Slope. Yet about 85% of Colorado's population lives along the Front Range on the state's East Slope. In a land once labeled the Great American Desert, Coloradans have learned through droughts and floods to be efficient with their water supplies. They have built the core structures to supplement what Mother Nature provides to almost 6 million people who now call Colorado home. The Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, known as Northern Water, was created in 1937 to help bring about one of the largest trans-mountain water diversion projects in American history, the Colorado Big Thompson Project. This project is designed to collect and store water from the melting snowpack near the headwaters of the Colorado River and bring it underneath the Continental Divide. As this water reaches northeastern Colorado, Northern Water distributes it through an elaborate system of reservoirs, canals, and tunnels to its 8-county service area. The Colorado Big Thompson Project provides supplemental water to nearly 1 million residents and more than 640,000 acres of some of the most productive irrigated farmland in the United States. 33 municipalities receive a portion of their water supply from the project, along with 120 ditch, reservoir, and irrigation companies. Let's take a closer look at how the system works. Bring together a Western Slope river basin, a large diversion tunnel under the Continental Divide, foothills reservoirs, and finally, an elaborate system of delivery pipelines and canals. Well before the project's inception, West Slope leaders also saw how water resources would be useful for industrial and irrigation expansion within the Colorado River Basin. To benefit West Slope users of the CBT project, Reclamation built Green Mountain Reservoir on the Blue River to provide water storage for the needs of western Colorado. Perhaps the project's most impressive feature is the 13.1-mile-long Alva B. Adams Tunnel, which carries water underneath the Continental Divide. Builders of the tunnel captured the nation's imagination in 1944 when crews digging from each side met in the middle, more than 2,000 feet underneath the tundra of Rocky Mountain National Park.
One of the other things that is going on is this kind of confluence between inflation and interest rates. And so, traditionally in fiscal policy, one of the things that the United States has done since the Federal Reserve was created in 1914 is that they've used interest rates as a way to control inflation. So the policy or the idea behind it is that as money is created, then you use and offset that with interest rates. And so the higher the interest rate goes, the more constriction there is on the monetary supply. And by doing that, what happens with that is that you're able to control inflation. For those of you that might be old enough, you might remember that in the 70s, kind of late 70s and early 80s, there was a chairman of the Fed called named Paul Volcker. And one of the things that he really did was try to control interest rates. And we saw interest rates climbing into the 10s, 12s, 13%. A lot of people who were buying their first houses in the 70s were actually paying interest rates that were as high as what a credit card is today. So pretty crazy to think about that. But that was one of the things that was happening. We've not seen that probably in the last 30 years between the Fed policy in the 90s and 2000s. Every time something that happened that was kind of crisis-oriented would happen, you would see a reduction in interest rates in order to sort of stimulate the economy. Since '08, we've really been kind of floating around at a prime rate of 0.05, which means that that's the interest rates that's lent back and forth between the banks, which means they make a margin on that afterwards, but that keeps interest rates somewhere in that 3% range. It's quite a thing to watch because now we've seen a lot of inflation happening. There's been a lot of talk about whether interest rates are going to raise or not. And the stock market sort of threw their fit over the last couple of weeks. And after the Fed had said that they thought they would raise interest rates in March, they decided to sort of put a pause button on that. We haven't seen anything really happen. There's been a couple of ticks up in between actual mortgage rates, but we haven't necessarily seen the prime rate move. I will say that at some point this is going to have to happen. So there's going to have to be a prime rate movement, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But I wanted to show this video about inflation, and kind of it helps you understand monetary policy, but also why inflation happens. The more money that's in the system, the more that money acts as a sponge on prices. And so what that does is, as money comes into the system, you'll see a increase in pricing that happens to your everyday discretionary spending. So milk and wood and cars and all those kinds of things start to see a pressure upwards. Some of that has to do with the supply chain, but a lot of it has to do with the amount of money that's in the system. So take a look at this. It's pretty interesting idea and explanation about how the Fed policy works, how money's created, and then what happens as a result of that.
Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, "Vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will." But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, "Loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest." Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. And through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, "Here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up." Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, "Hey, thanks for that." And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created, called bank credit, in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely the symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else.
Last thing I want to talk about is because of all that stuff and because of interest rates and inflation, one of the things that we're going to see is an increase in rental rates. We've seen that already starting to happen in the suburban areas where people are looking for single family houses. There aren't a lot of single family houses on the market for rent. So what you're getting is rents exceeding the $3,000 mark in areas like Windsor, areas like just West Greeley. Those kind of numbers are starting to be really traditionally those were well below 3,000. And they've moved themselves above 3,000 simply because there's not an inventory out there of rental houses to put on the market. So people, when a house does hit the market for rental, it tends to be pretty high. It is a good opportunity for those of you that are looking to get into the investment game. Although it will take a little bit more dollars to get in it, you'll also see a better return on those dollars because the numbers will be higher in terms of what you can actually rent the house for. So that's kind of a wild thing. I have a really great spreadsheet and calculator. If you are interested in the getting into the rental market or into the investment game, let me know, because I'd love to have coffee with you, show you how it works. It's pretty easy by putting in the price, the number of bedrooms, kind of the average rent per bedroom, and then it does all the calculations for you. It'll spit out all of your mortgage calculation along with all of the other costs that are part of it. So appreciate everybody that listens to these and goes through these with us. Every one of you that I send this to is somebody that I really have enjoyed doing business with. So I appreciate everybody kind of taking the time to watch the videos. We had a really great response to the last one. I think these are valuable. Again, at any time, if you feel like you don't want to see these things or don't want to have any information that you want to watch or they get too long, let me know. You can put it in the comments below or just give me an email if you want to. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon. Just for you too, and little snippets there for you to have a chance to get a chance to. Hey everybody, I wanted to get an update. Hey everybody, welcome to the February update for real estate in Northern Colorado. Wanted to, like I've been saying in the past, I wanted to get these emails out to you guys so you can have a little bit of a snippet on what's happening out there. Why am I using snippet? It's for you, Brandon Avery.